This knife has a straight edge on it, so it's very easy. And maybe in our world here, there lives a happy little mountain.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime videos. I do unsolved mysteries, disappearances, murders, psychological experiment videos, anything along those lines, as well as a little bit of university and lifestyle related videos sprinkled in where I can. Today I'm back with another one of my psychological experiment videos. It seemed to be your guys' favourites actually, and I'm doing one that is very well known, I guess, because if you have ever done psychology, it's another one of those ones that is very well integrated into psychology courses. I learned about this first in A-level actually, so I'm sure a lot of you guys will be familiar with it. It's not a particularly long case because it's kind of a case study experiment. It's just like one example, but if you kind of want me to do more of these, then let me know, because I always seem to get really good feedback from these. So today we're going to be talking about the experiment known as the Little Albert experiment. It was, like I said, kind of like a case study experiment carried out on just one child to do with conditioning and whether they can condition fear into human beings. So it's a little bit unethical because of the fear that they induced in this young boy. I'll go into it a little bit, but yes, if you want to hear a little bit about the experiment, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. The Little Albert experiment has become a very, very well known and kind of widely discussed psychological experiment that was carried out by behavioural psychologist John B. Watson. Watson was inspired by the very well-known experiment carried out by Pavlov, who kind of looked at the ability to condition responses in dogs. So I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of Pavlov's dogs. Basically, he managed to condition dogs so that they would salivate whenever they heard a bell ringing, because he conditioned their bodies into pretty much having this unknowing response to the sound of bell ringing, because they associated the noise of the bell ringing with food. So Watson wanted to kind of take this conditioning idea and see if it was possible to condition responses in human beings. The experiment took place in 1920 on an infant who was known as Albert B, although nowadays everyone kind of just refers to him as Little Albert. That's where the name the Little Albert experiment comes from. Albert was only young, he was only around 9 months old when he took part in the study, and the aim was to examine whether it was possible to condition a fearful response, so essentially make Albert have this phobia, have a fear of certain stimuli that he was not already fearful of. So the way they went about this was, at first they would just sort of expose Albert to a number of different stimuli. So these were a number of things. There was a monkey, there were masks, burning newspapers, a white rabbit, and also a white rat. He showed no fear whatsoever towards any of these stimuli, and if anything he was quite confident with them, in particular the animals. If anything, he showed sort of more of an interest in wanting to touch them. He wanted to see what they were, so he was a very inquisitive and very curious young boy, and so the experiment could kind of proceed because he showed no fear whatsoever of any of these items previously. So they then began the second round of exposure, and this is where they started to sort of implement this conditioning process. Their intention was to create this almost automatic fearful reaction towards the white rat, which, like I said, he wasn't already fearful of, so they knew that there wasn't already a phobia there. So the way they did it was, every time the white rat would be the stimulus that was shown to him, so they went through each of the stimulus again, exposing him to each one. Whenever they showed him the white rat or passed the white rat to him, Watson would hit a large metal bar with a hammer really loudly, so it was this large sudden noise. I mean, it would probably scare most of us, let alone a 9-month-old infant. So eventually, after all the trials, he just kept hitting this metal bar only when the white rat was shown. The noise was really loud and shrill, so of course, as you can imagine, would suddenly scare and shock Albert. He would obviously react badly, he would cry and scream because it was such a shock. So they continued doing this through each of the trials, like I said, only when the white rat was shown to Albert. And eventually, as you can imagine, it kind of created this automatic reaction, so that by the end, whenever they showed him the white rat, he would become fearful. He would react the same way he did whenever the loud noise was made. So he began associating the white rat with this fearful shock feeling. And so it became apparent that they were successful in conditioning this fearful response in the infant to this stimulus that he was exposed to. However, the findings of the experiment didn't actually end there, so they kind of ended up finding an effect that they didn't intend to set out to find. So obviously they found that they could potentially condition a fearful response in infants, but then after a while of this fearful response being shown to them, Albert began showing signs of something called stimulus generalization. So this meant that after the conditioning process, he was not only fearful of the white rat, but he was also fearful of anything that looked or felt like a white rat. And this covered everything. I'm sure if you can go online, you can probably find some clips or at least some photos of some of the things that they then exposed him to. But he was fearful of anything from Watson's beard to a lab coat, anything pretty much white with a little bit of texture to it, he became fearful of as well. So although this experiment is fascinating and it can provide some really kind of groundbreaking and substantial evidence and explanations for our ability to conditions through early learning processes, it does flag up a number of ethical issues, as I'm sure you've gathered by now. As you can imagine, it was considered highly unethical because they practically forced a phobia, a permanent phobia, on this infant. So not only did throughout the experiment they give him complete shock moments, so they scared him at numerous points throughout the experiment to the point where he'd scream and cry, but they also created, like I said, this seemingly permanent fear or phobia in this young child. Following the experiment, Watson and colleagues allegedly tried to reverse condition, so try and get rid of this phobia that they had almost induced in this infant. And there have been little updates on Albert after the experiment, post-experiment, but it was believed that they weren't fully successful in eliminating this phobia they'd induced in him, and it's believed that he grew up kind of with at least some form of fear or hesitation towards white rats and things that look similar. A more recent investigation into the original experiment case files actually led to the discovery of what people believe is the true identity of the boy known as Little Albert. So apparently this investigation led people to believe that Little Albert was actually a young boy named Douglas Merritt. However, if it is in fact this same boy, sadly Douglas Merritt died 5 years later when he was just 6 years old because of a result of a fluid buildup in his brain. And for a number of years people believed this was the true identity of Little Albert, and then in 2012 a report came out that kind of disputed some of the claims that Watson made in his original case files. So in the original files he said that the boy Little Albert was a very healthy young boy, there was nothing wrong with him, he was happy, they'd looked at medical records, there was nothing wrong with him, and that's why they allowed him to continue on this experiment like nothing was wrong really. But this report that was released in 2012 argued that if the boy had been Douglas Merritt, Watson would have been fully aware of this condition that would ultimately end in Douglas's death because he had it from birth. So this report then claimed that either the boy known as Little Albert was not actually Douglas Merritt, or Watson had knowingly lied in his original case files. But then this paper was then disputed in 2014 when new evidence came out that claimed that Douglas Merritt was not actually the boy known as Little Albert, and that it could have potentially been a young boy named William Barger. William was actually born on the same day as Douglas Merritt, hence the confusion. However, ever since he was born, William Barger was known by his middle name, his parents and all his loved ones, and everyone that knew him called him by his middle name, which was Albert. There was much deliberation about the true identity of Little Albert and what happened to him after the experiment, but obviously if you know anything about psychological experiments and ethical guidelines, you know that due to the nature of psychological experiments, the true identities of participants are supposed to remain anonymous. But aside from all this conversation about the true identity of Little Albert, Watson's study itself has remained pivotal. Yes, it might be, unethical and immoral, but it is extremely important, groundbreaking, pivotal research for our understanding of the condition processing in humans, and it's still something, like I said, discussed today in psychology. We talk about it all the time. It's one of the the main core case studies that we continually discuss. So that's everything I have to talk about today. I hope you guys found this a little bit interesting. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of this because, like I said, it's quite a big piece of research, but if you haven't, I hope you learned something new today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know all of your requests down below. I'm always looking for cases to research because it can be very hard to find new cases, so anything you have, leave them down below, or you can send me a message on any of my social media. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found it interesting, and I'll see you guys soon for another video. Bye.